Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be involved with the Heartland event. For those of you, briefly, I work on the industry side, getting people through the permit process, dealing with environmental regulations. That's my job. That's the clicker? Mm-hmm. All righty. So one of the things that we constantly hear from people like Sierra Club or other environmental NGOs is that we are not about science, that we're not following the science. So I want to show you some science that has nothing to do with greenhouse gases. That bottom line on this chart is how much we've reduced air pollution of the criteria pollutants since 1970, a 73% reduction. Well, at the same time, we've had growth in GDP, population, vehicle miles traveled, all these other things. We have done an amazing job. But every Earth Day, you know what it's going to be like. Earth Day is National Guilt Day. I have never once heard anybody from the Sierra Club or NRDC point out these stats. The same goes with CO2. We're back to 1990s levels of CO2 emissions. And when people start talking about, oh, the US has to do something, when in reality there's nothing, even if we cut it to zero, you guys know it wouldn't matter, there's never any acknowledgement of all that has been done. CO2 greenhouse gas emissions have started dropping in 2008 and continue to, and unfortunately, because of coal plant retirements and other reasons, they will continue to drop. So, I'm supposed to talk to you about the cost of excessive regulation to industry. And there's two kinds of costs that we're talking about. Direct costs, things like labor, actual changes in formulation, things like paints or inks, paying for clowns like me to prepare a permit. All of those things are direct costs. For most large-scale industry, these are not any kind of barriers to entry. You know, if I'm doing a permit for an oil refinery and they're putting in our consultant, these things can be a barrier to entry is to small businesses. It's pretty tough for small businesses to get into the game if they have to handle all these costs. Indirect costs are more difficult. The five basic marketplace mobility opportunities. So if you're on the Sierra Club's hit list and you want to build something, anything new, they have all kind of tools to delay you. We heard in the last talk about new source review, which is a really good tool for the Sierra Club to use to delay projects, but they have a lot more. Decreased marketplace, there's a lot of businesses where somebody gets a to and they have to buy a new press, get it installed, and get going within 3 months in order to fulfill the contract. And they just can't do it with our regulatory structure. And then opportunity costs. It's very common for people to, overseas investors, to come to a company like mine and say, take us through the permitting process. What does that look like? And when they find out what it looks like, they say, I think we'll go looking somewhere else. And that happens a lot. It's a very complex process and needlessly so. Excessive regulation, what are the characteristics of excessive regulation? In my mind, when the punishment doesn't meet the crime, you know, like huge fines for paperwork violations that have no environmental effect, rules that add little or no value to the state of environment, we got plenty of those, rules that drive away businesses, rules that are needlessly complex. Reading environmental regs is an art form. It's provided me a good living for 30 years, and I appreciate it, but it's a job that shouldn't exist. And a short story, there's always been complaints about how complex the regs are, how hard they are to read. So under the Clinton administration, they decided, okay, we're going to fix that. We're going to make regulations readable. And what they did was the first part of every regulation, environmental regulation, it used to be titled applicability. And then you had all the verbiage. Now it says, the title of the first part is, does this rule apply to me? Question mark. That made it a better regulation. The next part would be, used to be timing. And now the title of the next part is, what deadlines should I be aware of? And then all the rest of the language is the same. So it was government think at its worst. Excessive regulation imposes or allows unnecessary delays, overvalues risk and undervalues reward, or vice versa, depending on what environmental group is involved, and of course discourages innovation. Innovation is one of the hardest things for environmental agencies at the state level to handle. If you want to build a new process that's never been built before, the first thing you're going to say 90% of the time is, what's the data? What emissions data do you have on this process? I said, did you not just hear me say this is serial number 1? So we can estimate, but we're going to have to work together to see if this new innovative process is going to meet those estimates or not. And that's hard for agencies to do. So let's pretend you want to build a new power plant. Now, you know it's not going to be a coal-fired power plant because of the last session. So you come to me, you say, well, I want to build a natural gas-fired power plant. What do I have to worry about? Endangered species, historical artifacts that may be on the site that you choose, the possible effect on Class 1 areas within 200 miles of your plant, Class 1 areas, natural parks and such. Wastewater and stormwater, the municipality that you're near will probably want a traffic study. And then the big kahuna is your air quality construction permit. That's going to be the most expensive and take the most time. So we're going to build this, we're going to try to get our permit for this power plant. How long does it take? Give me a timeline, Mr. Consultant. Okay. So to prepare and submit the application, 90 days from go-ahead. The permitting authority will typically take another 90 days to review it. Then they'll submit a draft copy of the permit to US EPA for review. And then the draft permit will go to public notice. And there'll be opportunity for public comment and opportunity for a public meeting. All of this takes more than a year. We're about a year and a half in at this point. And one of the things Sierra Club is great at is gaming the system through public comments. If they have a project that they oppose, they tell all of their members to send in a comment. EPA is legally required to provide an answer to each and every comment. When they get 5,000 comments, that's quite a chore. Now they do organize them into similar comments, but still, dealing with 5,000 public comments, the Sierra Club brags about how that, that clogs up the system, and that's another piece we need to fix. Anyway, the permit is then issued. Here, we're about a year and a half in, and now there's a permit appeal. The state level permit appeal can go into place. The state agency, let's say they're moving real quick, they deny the appeal. So then the next place to go is the Environmental Appeals Board. That's the federal appeals board. The important thing to know about the Environmental Appeals Board is you can appeal a permit for any reason. Like maybe you didn't think the permit application contained the letter G sufficiently. It doesn't matter. And once you make that appeal, the permit is automatically stayed. So everything stops. You have to stop work on your project until the EAB rules on it. And that can take up to a year. It usually takes around a year before it gets through the EAB. Once it gets through the EAB, even if it does, and you're really on the Sierra Club's radar, they can still file a judicial appeal. So now in this theoretical project, we're 3 years in, and the developer said, forget it. That happens a lot, and that's what needs to change. And if you look at the tests that I described about what makes for over enforcement, that's all of those criteria. I'm not saying we shouldn't have permitting. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thorough and let the public get involved, but we've created a monster that has so many tentacles, it's impossible to get our arms around for doing the big modern projects that we should want to do. There's the Sierra Club's, how the Sierra Club used the system, and this is from their own website. They killed 192 coal projects. That's more than 100 gigawatts could have been built that they managed to kill by gaming the system. I was debating a Sierra Club chapter head on the radio once, and he had the gall to say to me, well, you know, your clients are running around with all these coal plants who are, 40, 50 years old, and, you haven't modernized them. And I'm like, Jack, that's on you. You're the guy who every time we try to build a new coal plant that would be more modern, more efficient, cleaner, you oppose it. You're responsible for the aging fleet, not me, not my clients. We've seen this before. The reality is the environmentalists have this dream of everything running by solar power and on wind. And we know that's not going to happen. Yet they pretend like it is, and what's scary is that there are politicians out there who believe that could actually happen. This energy forecast is another EIA energy forecast. We've seen a few of them. It sees the percentage of renewables going from about 8% to close to 17% in 2040. That was prepared by the EIA under Obama. And I think it shows that the real choices we're going to be making here are between coal, nuclear, and natural gas. And we have to have an intelligent person's discussion about what that mix should look like. Because obviously there's pluses and minuses to all of them. But it's not going to be a renewable future. One other point on renewables that I find interesting and indicative of that state on the West Coast that seems to have lost its mind, California. They have a very large renewable portfolio requirement right now, but they don't count large hydroelectric as renewable power. That's not renewable anymore. And then a final point, it's really, as Trump manages to break through some of the federal log jams, there's a big difference in permitting depending basically on whether it's a red state or a blue state. That's what we see. Our company has offices all across the country. It's a lot easier getting a project done and permitted in Texas than it is in my state of Illinois. It's a lot easier getting one done in Indiana than it is in California. And when people ask me about, should I build a new project in Illinois, I'm sad to say, as a lifelong Illinoisan, I say, you're really a lot better over the border. You'd rather deal with Indiana than us if you want your project done quickly and painlessly. And I think you're going to see more of that as this political schism continues. And it'll be interesting to see what the economic effects are, especially as some of the federal flotsam and jetsam is cleared away. And that's all I have for you. I don't know why it's going back. Oh, that's because I'm going backwards. Okay. That's it. Thank you.